Hi, everybody. I'd like to thank John and the members of West Hill United Church for inviting us here today to speak to the issue of homelessness. I was here for the service last week, and I have to tell you, I was completely inspired when I left the church. It is so nice to see such a strong sense of community, along with a willingness to learn more about social issues, and in turn, as a community, looking for ways to contribute to social justice. So let's talk about an issue that every community faces, homelessness. I will say that I have the information here up on slides, but there are some things that may be a little bit more hard to read because it's a little more information, but I will be sure to explain everything that's being presented up on the screen. Okay? I'm going to start with some facts about homelessness. In 2009, approximately 147,000 people, or about 1 in 230 Canadians, stayed in a homeless shelter. In one night in Toronto, over 5,000 people will identify themselves as homeless, either staying in a shelter or living on the streets. Youth make up about 20% of the homeless population in both Toronto and in Canada. And there are currently over 70,000 people on the waiting list for social housing, which usually means about a 10-year wait. How does homelessness find its way into a family's life? So first I'm going to talk about the individual risk factors. The conditions or characteristics that make it difficult for an individual to function well enough to meet his or her housing needs, or to meet the housing needs of their children, of the children in their care, and often lead to homelessness. These include substance abuse or addiction, severe and persistent mental illness and mental disorders that impair an individual's ability to function well enough to work and or remain appropriately housed without supportive services. I'm sure you can imagine if someone is dealing with addictions or severe mental health and does not have supports, that sometimes housing doesn't become the priority on their agenda. People that have a history of abuse as children or as adults, people with poor financial management and resultant bankruptcy and credit issues, and a lack of work experience or education to gain a higher wage employment. The systemic risk factors, conditions that are beyond an individual's direct control that act to create and or perpetuate homelessness include the critical lack of affordable housing, including a significant reduction in social housing units. As I mentioned before, there's currently 70,000 people waiting for social housing. Fragmented, underfunded mental health and substance abuse treatment system. I'm sure a lot of you can remember years ago there was a deinstitutionalization of mental health services, and a lot of people that were receiving in-house residential services no longer received those and were asked to leave the institutions and basically fend for themselves. Low-wage jobs that do not pay enough for a worker to maintain high rents and cost of living. Currently, the minimum wage does not cover the cost of living. If someone is working strictly for minimum wage, chances are they will have to choose between shelter or food and not afford to be able to have both. So what is the cycle of homelessness? So the cycle of homelessness is seen when homelessness and poverty are the intergenerational symptoms of marginalization. So when a family is facing homelessness or are marginalized in other ways, again, like I was speaking to before, it is difficult for parents to sometimes focus on the needs of their children when they're focusing on their own issues or focusing on keeping them housed. And sometimes it's difficult for them to show the children the way, to teach them the basic life skills that they need to be able to survive in society. When parents have high trauma but low support in the areas of concern, addictions, mental health, low income, employability, or a lack of affordable housing. So when we see the children return to the shelter as adults with their own families, we can see how homelessness can be a cycle and how sometimes it's difficult to break it. But what is the cycle of homelessness really? We're going to hear from Dane now, who is currently experiencing homelessness and is doing everything he possibly can to break the cycle. And he's going to give us a little bit of insight as to how that looks. So Dane?
First, I want to thank you all for this opportunity today. to speak in front of you about what I've experienced. And I'm here to share my story and what I've done so far since I've become homeless. So it all started back in June. I was living in my home with my mother. My life was pretty much on cruise control. Hello? Better? Okay. All right, so I'll start again from the top. It all started back at the beginning of June. I was living my life pretty much on cruise control with a part-time job, enjoying summer vacation, while I geared up for my last year of university. Then, without any warning at all, my life was thrown into chaos. My landlord gave my mother and I a week to move out and find a new place. Although, to be honest, it wasn't truly without warning. Outside of natural disasters or a fire, everyone knows when they are approaching homelessness to some extent. What we were earning was just not efficient enough to sustain our current lifestyle. Between food, bills, and keeping up with rent, somewhere deep down inside of me, I understood that it was only a matter of time until we ran into this situation. I was definitely in denial to some extent. For the past 7 years of my life has become progressively worse in nearly every aspect, and the majority of it was well out of my control. But even with all the trials and tribulations I was put through, there was never a time where I had to consider a worst case scenario like homelessness. That week was pretty much the shortest week of my entire life. An 8-hour shift at my part-time job went from being incredibly useful to being a direct interference. As I tried to sort out my entire life story, we managed to find a place the following Thursday, and we're planning to move in on Monday. Unfortunately, our bad luck streak continued as we ran into one complication after another, and by the end of the entire move, it had just become a mess. On one end, I had my mother who was trying to sort out the funds for the movers. And on the other end, there was me who was sorting out an irate landlord and an agitated mover who began muttering threats underneath his breath. Eventually, the landlord had enough and revoked the lease on the spot. At the time, I was devastated, but looking back on it, I can only view that as a blessing in disguise because, let's be honest, who in their right mind would want to live with a landlord who would act like that? Unfortunately, that also meant that we were left with nothing but the clothes on our back and whatever we had in the backseat of our car and the trunk, while the movers had a change of heart once they understood the situation and volunteered to hold on to our items until we could figure something out. After 2 days, we were fortunate enough to be connected to family residents who gave us a place to stay. Honestly, it wasn't until I set my bag down in my room that I actually felt any sort of emotional response to the entire ordeal. After a week and a half of madness, I had a place to stay, which finally gave me a chance to reflect on everything that led up to our homelessness and what I should do from this point to salvage my life. I was 1 year away from graduating university and moving on to an internship and eventually starting a career and moving on with my life. But all of that had to be put on hold until I could control the most important aspects of my life, which included having a steady flow of income, a roof over my head, and regular access to food. Simple enough, but it meant I had to find a full-time job, which can be very difficult for people in my age group. So I regrouped mentally and physically and began inquiring into what Toronto Services had to offer now that I was a part of their system. If there was one thing I cannot emphasize enough, it's the importance of networking. You never know what one conversation will lead you to. All I had to do was make an effort to speak to another worker working at family residence, and after presenting what I had been going through, she connected me to someone who had a new employment program. One thing led to another, and as long as I made the appointments and went out to see the people, everything kind of fell into place, and I found myself with 3 interviews and an opportunity for steady employment. One thing I did encounter over the past 2.5 months, from all the work that I put in and from the people I've spoken with, was their surprise in seeing someone like myself put that much effort towards building a sustainable life. And to some extent, some people see it as a rare case to see a young man like myself take that much time and energy to rebuild their life so soon after it all fell apart. But I feel that the only reason why that may seem the case for some people is because there's still a large portion of growing men of all races and descents who just don't have the foundation to make this kind of effort, and I don't believe it's their fault. I had the ambition to lead me to start working at a very young age, but it was my mother who was the person driving the car to pick me up and drop me off to and from work. And I feel that young men like myself need a better support system before they start taking up responsibilities given to them. One thing I did notice while I was using all of Toronto's services was there wasn't anything directed straight towards young men. Most of the services were family-oriented or towards women. And I feel like that something about that should change, and maybe in the future more young men could be welcomed in from Toronto Services or any community program that would be willing to take them in and support them and help them gain the skills that they would need to succeed in the future. Men in general, when it comes to expressing themselves, I feel like that should be encouraged instead of shamed or hidden. There's a lot of underlying emotions that a lot of us have, but we don't really have a safe haven to go and discuss some of our issues or problems. And we're taught from a very young age to bottle our emotions, which could lead to a lot of frustration and may change the path that we take down the wrong road. And as much as I talk about how hard I've worked to improve my life, I have to admit that it was extremely hard. And if I had not learned to start relying on myself from a young age, I may have turned out just like the rest of them and become another statistic. And I'm also not afraid to admit that I have my own fair share of issues as well, including depression. And on top of all the other pressures young men such as myself have to deal with, there's also the stigma of being a part of Toronto Services. There are definitely people out there who judge you for using their services, who look down on you. And that's why I feel that it's important to push forward so that you never have any time to look back and pay attention to those behind you. I had to use every single day to the fullest to even reach this point. I had to accept that school and my dream job were going on hold so I could focus on creating an environment where those two goals could be met. I had to accept that I could no longer live my life on cruise control, and if I didn't take every day seriously, that could be the end for me. And I had to accept that I'm living life a little bit harder than the rest, but that doesn't mean I had to give up and just take it. I deserve to live a good life, and so does everyone else in here and anyone else that works hard towards a brighter future for themselves and or their loved ones.
I'm a little shorter than Dane. Thank you so much, Dane. Amazing. You are an inspiration to us all. I've been working with Dane for a little while now on today's presentation, and every single meeting inspired me that much more. This is a young man who wants to break the cycle, who wants to make something of his life, and will not use any excuses to prevent him from doing that. Good for you. Good for you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we can do as an individual or as a community. The fact is we can all make a difference in one way or another, big or small. We can all use our voices, we can all be heard. As a group or individual, call or write to your political representative, highlighting your concerns about the lack of affordable housing for low-income households. In case you weren't aware, your councillor in this area is Paul Ainsley, and your MP is John McKay. I know that both of these men are open to hearing from us, from the public, and I think it's really important to highlight that this lack of affordable housing is the key to at least reducing homelessness.
There's also the provincial MPP who's just
Yes. Okay, yeah. Oh, okay, yes, please. Anyone that has any kind of clout, let them hear your voice. Okay, wonderful. Educate yourself to spread the word and destigmatize those facing poverty and homelessness. Just putting that general understanding out there that the face of homelessness is everyone. And I am a firm believer that every person is a paycheck away from potential homelessness, depending on what happens to you in your situation. Whenever possible, give encouragement and inspire hope to the marginalized and underserved members of our community. The power of words is just that, extremely powerful. I've often seen a person's perspective change from a few words of praise or encouragement. Telling someone you have faith in them can be a powerful turning point. Donate your time. Work or volunteer with agencies that provide assistance to marginalized people. Contact a local shelter to volunteer to be a supportive figure or a mentor in the life of a homeless parent or child. Working with at-risk seniors who may need help with everyday chores like grocery shopping, budgeting, or maintaining their home, because sometimes those things just become too overwhelming and it snowballs into a very negative effect. Since 2009, the number of homeless seniors has increased by 3.5%, and that number is expected to grow considerably over the next 5 years. If you're aware of an affordable housing opportunity, please let somebody know. Contact a local shelter, contact an agency that works with people to find housing. Even that basement apartment that's a little bit cheaper than your average market rent could make a huge difference in the life of someone that's looking for housing. Community programming. Using available space within your community to offer programs that will uplift one's spirit and show that there are many people in this community that care and have passion to help reduce homelessness in our city. These programs can be as simple as teaching someone to cook, teaching someone to sew, even just having a group discussion so that someone can socialize themselves a little bit more to gain the confidence when they're going out to talk to that landlord or talk to that potential employer. Meal programs, always needed, always needed. Offering a free meal is always appreciated. Clothing and toy drives. Doing a community clothing drive and letting an agency know that you have clothing to spare. Always very, very helpful. As I mentioned before, the cycle of homelessness can be seen in the children of families that are homeless in the future. So focusing on the children is sometimes our most powerful action. Please continue to donate your school supplies to the children in the shelter. I actually run that program at Family Residence, and I want to thank you because I know West Hill is a part of that. And September is one of my favorite times of year in the shelter. Seeing these children getting their new backpacks and their new school supplies, it's like Christmas. The confidence that it puts into them to be able to walk into their classroom equal to the other children that have those brand new backpacks and have those new school supplies and aren't having to carry a grocery store bag with all of their items in it. It's inspiring, and it just increases their self-confidence that will be shown in all aspects of their life. Tutor or offer homework help at your area school. Connect with the principal, connect with the secretary. If there's an area that maybe you're a little bit more skilled in, that you can go in and help a young child in with their homework or their school plans, please, that's very, very helpful. Because as I'm sure a lot of you know, our classrooms have way too many children and not enough teachers. So those kids that are needing the one-to-one care aren't necessarily receiving them, especially in neighborhoods where there is a high need. Adopting a family is always an option. This could be a one-time gesture, like during the holiday season, offering some gifts and a meal for a family in need. Or it can be a longer-term commitment to connecting with a family and offering them support and guidance while they try to establish themselves within the community. Breakfast programs are also needed. As I'm sure you've all heard, breakfast is one of the most important meals of the day. Particularly some of the children that are staying in the shelter, their parents don't also want to uproot them from their school, so they are traveling far to the original school that they came from. So sometimes the commute alone doesn't allow for time to have a proper meal at home. So if they get to school and there's a meal there, that can be very helpful. So I'm just going to end with a quote. Children are our links to the future. By focusing on the children, we may be able to mitigate the effects of instability and all that is negatively associated with homelessness. Thank you again so much for letting us come out to talk to you, and we just appreciate the fact that you're willing to listen and willing to be open to what we have to say. Thank you very much.